Hi, folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is session number 402, Money and Wellness. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we are once again. Great to have you with me. Thank you so much for joining me. A little in-between episode for you. Just taking a breather from season 18, the ultimate guide season. Money is inextricably linked with our sense of well-being, right? That link is the reason for more and more research and initiatives into how to improve our relationship with money. And today I'm speaking with a real-life brain scientist to dig into the subject, okay? I'm not going to have any reviews or anything after this week's show because conversations tend to be a little bit longer, but we will look at what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. But as ever, before any of that, remember this podcast is brought to you with the help of 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out here and supporting me on Meaningful Money since the spring of 2011, which is just amazing. I'm so grateful to them for doing so. Please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. Now, Dr. Ash Ranpura is one of those people, you read his CV, you feel just a tiny bit intimidated, okay? As a university dropout, that's me, not him. It's like, okay, this guy's fairly bright and very well qualified. Lovely guy. He will introduce himself in just a second, but as well as being super bright, he's an excellent communicator and a great choice of spokesman for the Money Wellness Index, which is an initiative by First Direct. First Direct reached out to me, asked if I wanted to have a conversation with Ash. I'm properly jealous of you as an audience. I don't put people in front of you too lightly, but I really enjoyed my conversation with Ash, and I hope that you will too. Remember, notes, links from today's show, they're at the show notes, and that's the only link you need to remember. meaningfulmoney.tv/session402, meaningfulmoney.tv/session402. Here's my conversation with Dr. Ash Ranpura. Well, it's a delight to welcome Dr. Ash Ranpura, who is, and forgive me, I'll have to just read this because I can't keep it in my mind, clinical neurologist and research neuroscientist, to the Meaningful Money Podcast. Ash, great to have you, sir. Thank you for joining me. How are you doing today?
Very nice to be here. Great. Thank you. That was well said.
Yeah. Not well remembered, but well said. I'll take that. Ash, let's, I think for context, I get approached a lot to have people onto the podcast, and I'm extremely protective of my audience, as you can expect. But the study that you've been involved with, that we're going to talk about, the Money Wellbeing Index, was enough to pique my interest. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to you about that. Sorry, it's Wellness Index. Let me get that right. So first of all, though, for context, can you just give us a sense of who you are, what you do, and how you got to this point?
Yeah, well, I wonder that myself sometimes, but it's a strange ride. So I'm a clinical neurologist, which means that I'm a medical doctor who sees patients with disorders of the brain and central nervous system. So things like multiple sclerosis, strokes, seizures. So I see patients in an outpatient clinic, mostly in the United States. So that's one part of my career. And then I do research in cognitive neuroscience. So that means I study the relationship between the brain and behavior.
Okay.
So I got involved in sort of a funny way. First Direct had already done the Money Wellness Index by the time they contacted me. And what I've done some work on behavior change. So what is it that happens in the brain when we change a habit or we change a pattern? And can we use some knowledge of how the brain works to guide our behaviors in life, like really to make real decisions instead of just in an abstract sense, understanding what the brain does. And really First Direct had done this, what I think is a really interesting study. It's a survey study. They looked at, they talked about 4,000 people, 4,000 consumers across the United Kingdom, and asked them, they weren't really interested in what specifically they did with their money, but they were interested about their emotional reactions to money. How do they feel about their financial life? And they wanted to talk to me then about how could people change their financial behaviors based on their emotional state. And that's a sort of a research interest of mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interest of mine as well. Much more.
Yeah, exactly.
So much more low level, I'm sure, the sort of context that you're dealing with. But as a financial planner for 20 years, I've watched people react and behave around their finances, and it's a source of endless interest to me. How did the study, this UK Money Wellness Index, which is driven by First Direct, how does it measure wellness? It seems like quite a subjective sort of thing. What sort of questions are they asking, and how
Well,
is it being scored?
I think you brought up an extremely good point, which is that a lot of times I think, and I'm saying this as a complete outsider to the financial industry, but my impression is that when the financial industry measures wellness or measures financial health, it's numeric. It's going to be like an objective measurement. How much do people have in savings? How much are they spending relative to their mortgage, and so on. So I think the innovative idea with the Money Wellness Index is that it is a purely subjective index.
Okay.
Now, I'm interested in this as a neuroscientist, someone who studies behavior, because we know that looking at how people behave, you can predict how people behave based on their emotional state far better than you can based on a rational evaluation of things. I mean, humans, like all other animals, we evaluate the world. We come to some evaluation, and that evaluation is represented by our emotional state. So we either feel threatened, we feel secure, we feel relaxed, and that's going to drive our behavior far more than a rational evaluation of the environment would. So that's the goal of the Money Wellness Index. And I think to some extent it's inspired by some interesting work that the Office of National Statistics has been doing in Britain, looking at wellness as a general concept. So how anxious are people feeling? How much do they feel secure in the political system and in the decisions of government? So ONS is interested in it on that level, and First Direct thought, let's look at it at a financial level.
So I believe that sort of the baseline, the first index level, was set in January, when surely nobody can have foreseen what has happened so quickly after that. So before, obviously, the impact of COVID and everything that's come with that, what was the sort of the general findings of the baseline study, the Money Wellness Index, back in January? What did that find about how we feel as a nation around our money?
Yeah, so I think the data probably was collected in the fall of 2019. So let's say September, November, December, that sort of time range, 2019, and then published in January. And what they found is probably not surprising to you or to listeners of your podcast. There's a lot of anxiety around money. People across all ages and interestingly, across all wealth distributions have some anxiety about money. The Money Wellness Index asked questions like, do you feel secure about your financial life? Do you feel you know enough about finances? There were some questions, I think, about how do you feel relative to other people? These kinds of things. Do you feel secure about your financial future? So as you can imagine, well, I mean, it was something like almost 60% of people who responded to this study were unhappy about their financial life in some way. And usually that meant they felt they didn't know enough about finances and that they were anxious about their finances. And that even included people earning more than £100,000 a year. So pretty high earners had a lot of financial anxiety as well. And in those cases, in the case of the high earners, a lot of that anxiety had to do with comparing themselves to other people. So this, again, it's one of the interesting things about the human brain. Like, we don't tend to, particularly with finances, we don't tend to compare downwards. We don't look and say, well, we're a lot better off than 98%. You know, maybe in Britain, I would say on average, you're probably better off than 98% of people on the planet. But we sort of look upwards and we say we're not as well off as those other people.
Is there a reason for that? Is there some sort of physiological reason or sort of evolutionary reason for that?
I think, you know what, I think there's a cultural reason for that.
Okay.
And a physiological reason. So I would say the physiological reason is that we respond a lot more. When I say that, the brain tunes in. So we pay attention to threat. And threat really, really grabs your attention. So you're much more likely to notice a threat than notice something which isn't a threat. And that's a basic survival mechanism that all animals have, and we have that. So the mechanism that gates attention in the brain is based on threat. And I think that culturally, we've trained ourselves to envy, and we put more emphasis on envy because it gets the juices flowing, than compassion. So we don't feel compassion for people that have less than us. We practice feeling envious of people that have more than us. And that is, we have a little bit of a biological bias and then probably a big cultural bias. to do that.
Yeah. I can imagine that. I can't imagine that being the case 10,000 years ago. Do you know what I mean? That sounds like it would be more of a cultural thing, and to my mind, not a positive one, and certainly not
No,
if
but
it helps.
I mean, it's interesting because I found, particularly, so in my own life, I live in a small village in Somerset, pretty rural village. And at the beginning of the first lockdown, I would say that there was a real outpouring of compassion here. So people started delivering meals to the elderly. We have a village forum, a sort of a web forum. And people started posting things saying, if anybody needs help. There were some families whose kids were home from university. They said, well, they're able to help with tasks around the garden, or if anybody needs things run to the dump or anything like that. So I think there is a compassion, and humans have a natural compassion on a village scale. I think that starts to become difficult when you get to I sort of call them non-evolutionary scales, the scales of society that other animals don't live in groups of millions. Most animals live in small groups, and when we are in a small group, we're pretty compassionate to that small group.
So we tend to compare ourselves upwards, and that generally leads to anxiety. And then there's a link between a lack of knowledge and anxiety. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just not lack of knowledge, but lack of knowledge is at the center of it.
Uh-huh.
It's two things. I think on the one hand, it's the lack of the feeling of knowledge. So sometimes you know more than you think you know, and sometimes you know less than you think you know. But it's how much you feel you know that creates anxiety, right? You feel that you don't know enough. So that's one part. But the other part is, I like to use this word agency. So by agency, I mean all animals, humans included, feel stressed when they're unable to affect their own circumstances. So if you put a rabbit in a cage, that is enough to make the rabbit feel extremely stressed if something bad is happening. And similarly, I think one thing that makes people nervous in the pandemic is that this is this big thing that's controlling your life, and you don't have any ability to influence it. And that's one of the things that I think really tricky about finances in general. This large force. Everybody in the world seems to be manipulating it. Governments and corporations and businesses and laws. These are all forces that are bigger than you as a person. And so you don't have this sense of agency that what you imagine in your mind can happen in reality. And that sense of agency makes us feel comforted.
Has the pandemic affected things negatively then? So do people feel less agency now than perhaps they did beforehand? And is that evidenced in the Money Wellness Index?
What's so funny, I say this to you, and what's so funny is that in a way the opposite happened. That really? Is what you've just said is what I would have predicted would happen.
Yeah, sure. People, sounds logical,
right? Yeah, because like the local pub closes down, you have no control over that, so you feel a lack of agency and you feel stressed. Exactly the opposite has happened. So when people, so First Direct ran the study initially in fall of 2019, intending to publish it once a year, every January. And then of course the pandemic happened. Everybody realized that it's been a massive change before January 2021, so republish it. So they published it again in I think September of this year. And they found some interesting things. They asked specific questions about the pandemic. So for example, they found 48% of people who responded were more aware of their finances after the pandemic than before the pandemic. So almost half of people paid more attention to money. About 43% of people said they were more likely to save money. 39% said that they had reduced spending. Some things that you're going to love. About 28% of people were more likely to pay off credit card debt after the pandemic, right? 40% of people said they were more likely to prepare for a financial. 46% of people said they were less likely to borrow money from a bank. So some of the things that are associated with financial health, I would say those indicators in some weird way got better.
Yeah.
Not only that, Office of National Statistics did some work, and they showed that in general, not by major differences, but there was like an uptick in measures of happiness, of well-being, a decrease in anxiety. And there were some surprising findings from them too. But the interesting thing I think is that in the pandemic, a lot of it spent in lockdown, where we were spending time with friends and family in small environments. We were unable to go out, we were unable to have a lot of retail spending. Now, for businesses in the economy, that's terrible.
Mm.
But for your individual sense of well-being, suddenly there's no opportunity to spend as much money as you would normally spend. And of course, that makes you feel a bit richer by comparison.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't go to a restaurant, then you don't worry. Nobody's going to the restaurant. So you compare your lives to everyone else. Suddenly, everybody's staying at home. Everybody's kind of, you know, hanging out, doing not very much, hoping things get better. And I think there's a sort of a feeling of community and a feeling of well-being in that. I think the other thing that was, to me, very interesting about the pandemic is that it affected everybody all at once.
Yeah, all levels. Yeah.
Right? And particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, I think there was a feeling that this is just happening to the whole world. And then you feel less anxious. If you feel you're in the same boat as everyone else, you feel less anxious.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I'm feeling encouraged then. I mean, one of the things, I get tons and tons of emails, and I've spent 10 years trying to give people agency over their money by just getting them as much useful, practical, actionable information out as possible. And one of the baseline things is have an emergency fund, right? It's not a holiday fund. It's not a Christmas fund. This is if things hit the fan fund. And of course they have for many people this year, and easily the number one sort of email subject that I've had in my inbox since March is, thank God I listened to you and put in an emergency fund in place, because it meant that of all things going on this year, they haven't had to worry about money. So, I'll chalk that to one, perhaps a credit in my getting to heaven one day. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm more delighted that it's that people have taken action. And if there is, I just wonder how long-lived this sense of, I need to be more prepared in future. I need to have less credit card debt. I need to have an emergency fund place. I just wonder how long-lived that will be, because we revert to type so quickly, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think that so the question is, can we take these lessons that we've learned and really make them part of who we are, rather than just something we did in an exceptional year? There's some tension there. So on the one hand, these things like, okay, less consumer spending, less credit card debt, less borrowing of money from banks, those things are probably bad for the economy, measured by these big, nationwide measurements that we use, gross domestic product or consumer spend, all of these retail spending indices. So there's a tension that a lot of times when we make financial decisions as a society, we use these big numbers that don't really look at how people are feeling about financial health in the society. And on the other hand, it turns out that when we spend less money, we save more, we're more conservative. That does take money out of the financial system. It takes money out of the churn that generates growth in a society, but it makes us feel better. Yeah. So I think part of the problem here is that there's a conflict between this idea of economic growth and actually what people want from life and from their society. There's a little bit of a conflict there.
Yeah, very much so. And I feel like the system could reset itself around a slightly lower level. I'm reading some stuff on systems theory at the minute, and it's sort of a reinforcing loop, the whole credit system. We borrow more so we can buy more, but of course then we compare ourselves with those higher up, and so we borrow more to buy more. And the system kind of it amplifies the system, because obviously the financial services industry makes more profit that way. And from a system level stuff, that might sound like a good thing, but it is contrary to the things that give us a sense of well-being as individuals, as organic beings. So just being at home, being able to maybe just slow down a little bit, I think has done a lot of people a lot of good this year. It's funny how there seems to be a bit of a tendency away from that as it drags on now. We go into winter. I think it was all okay in the nice sunshiny spring and summer, but it feels feels to be a little bit less of that sense of acceptance and community now. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. I think that you can change. So behavior change is always really easy around an event. So a lot of times, let's say people who want to exercise, it turns out that loads and loads of people start exercising the day after New Year's Day. Like January 1st, start a new exercise routine. So there is something really interesting about what happens in the brain when you have these arbitrary events, like arbitrary deadlines. So we just say it's easy to start a new behavior on New Year's Day. It's hard to continue it in March. So I think the same thing happens at the beginning of the pandemic. There's this big change. Suddenly there's a lockdown in society. So we do change some of our behaviors, and we change some of the ways we approach money. And the trouble is that if you don't really change your underlying values and you don't address the kind of the root causes of this behavior. So part of the reason that we spend money is that when we feel bored, or when we feel, a bit like the lights getting low in winter, and we sort of want something, we look for something. And the easiest thing to look for is you sort of buy something, you go out to a nice meal, or you buy something new for the house. So that's it's low-hanging fruit. It's just really easy to come to that solution. And until you start addressing the fact that, maybe I feel a bit lonely, maybe I feel a bit depressed, maybe I feel a bit anxious, and I'm treating my anxiety by spending. You sort of realize the reason that you're doing the spending. It's not really that you needed that extra chair or whatever.
No.
It's that, and I think to some extent it's worth treating anxiety with spending. So if you want to go have a meal when the restaurants open back up, if you think, I'm feeling a bit low, like maybe a celebratory meal with some friends, it's a great way to spend money. But you've made the decision that you're spending money in order to feel better. So I think it's fine when people make that decision. I think the trouble is when people don't realize that it's anxiety that's driving their behavior, and it creeps up on them. And I think that's when we get in trouble.
One of my sort of favorite phrases is to be intentional. So like you say, if you decide you're going to spend money, go out for a meal with friends, make yourself feel better, that's great. But like you say, if it's subconscious almost, then that's potentially a spiral. Is there a way to address that, or is it just a case of sort of pulling ourselves up and by our boot straps and just saying, right, come on, get on with it, sort of a sort of slap yourself on the wrist sort of thing? Has it got to be sort of self motivated? Is there any hacks that people can use to sort of identify when spending is unhealthy?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that the first thing to do is, and the difficult thing to do is emotional honesty. So really, really trying to understand what is the emotion that's driving your financial behavior. Because all I will say is, and this is a broad statement for a neuroscientist to say, I would say all behaviors are driven from some emotional state. And so you figure out what are the emotional states that are driving your financial behaviors, and that's fine. I don't think the approach of just pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and getting firm with yourself, I don't think that works as well as understanding the drivers and then changing the drivers. I mean, it'll work temporarily. This idea of willpower, that works temporarily, but doesn't work in the long run. So one is, I think, being honest with our emotional states. And the second thing is, finding value. Well, that's a big thing that I like to talk about. The difference between finding value and finding money. If you value, like I love your idea of the emergency fund, because I think there's great research that shows that quite a few people wouldn't be prepared for a relatively common crisis, like your car breaks down. Do you have the money to get a new rental car, get yourself to work in a week or two after your car breaks down? Maybe the insurance will pay for it in the end, but you've got to come up with it in the short term, right? So these kinds of crises are pretty normal. And if you're not prepared for that kind of crisis, then there will be this lingering sense of anxiety. Right? Something typical could happen to me out of the blue, and I would be in a really bad position if that happened. And at the back of your mind, that anxiety is always there, and it could drive some of your other spending behaviors, to seek security.
Yeah.
So I think the main thing we should do is really, really try to be emotionally honest with ourselves, figure out how we're really feeling about our money, and then how that's driving our financial behaviors.
So to pick up on you called it a big statement for neuroscience to make. All behaviors are driven from an emotional state. So awareness is obviously the start of most things. We need to be aware of our emotional state and try to be mindful of that. Is there a way then, rather than trying to sort of come on, buck up and sort our behaviors, and thereby hopefully our emotional state will benefit, we need to flip that around then? Ideally, we need to try and work on our emotional state, and then behaviors will follow from that. Is that what you're saying? And if it is, how do we do that?
Absolutely. So I think the easiest way is also to recognize there's a deep connection between emotional states and your body. So when you feel tension in your body, you probably are feeling tense. When we have a natural reaction to anxiety and threat. Our sympathetic nervous system becomes active. We start changing how our body behaves and how we move. So I think being able to start tuning in, like, if I think about my bank account, do I feel tense, or do I feel like, okay, fine, I've got a plan, and I think you can start to be, and this takes practice. It absolutely takes practice. Reading out, like, what is your body telling you about what your brain is about to do? Because your body will tell you first what kind of decision you're about to reach. Your brain goes through this quite slow cognitive process to ultimately realize what the body already knew. So if you're able to read the body directly, then you can speed up that process. You say, no, I'm feeling a sense of threat, so I'm probably going to take an action that's either aggressive or that makes me feel secure in some way. It's going to be one of those two. So it doesn't mean that if you're feeling threatened, you're going to put more money in your savings account. Some people, when they're feeling threatened, will spend more. You see what I mean? Like, it's what's your response to threat? Is it fight or flight? I mean, it's going to be one of the two, but it's going to depend on who you are, which one it is.
Yeah, I'm just writing down that either aggressive or seeking sort of refuge and looking for safety, fight or flight. I'm just wondering how that applies to finance it, and like you said, I suppose
Well, so I'll give you an
depends on the
example.
person. Yeah.
Right. So let's say that you have a big mortgage and you're struggling to make the payments, but you're making them. So you're making the mortgage payments, but that's pushing you right to the edge of your budget. So at the end of every month, you don't have a reserve. Now, some people will look at that and they'll batten down the hatches and they'll say, okay, less eating out, less going on holiday. We got to make sure that there's a little bit of a cushion after the mortgage. But some people will look at that and think, you know what, I'm not going to have the cushion anyway, so I'm going to borrow money on the credit card. I'm going to go on holiday because I work really, really hard to pay for that mortgage, and I don't want to live under this constant sense of threat. So people will go both ways.
Yeah,
you know, on
interesting.
that. I think you can't predict based on their behavior how they were feeling at the time. You just know they're going to do one way or the other. They're going to do something irrational. It's going to be and it's going to be irrational. It's going to be irrational. It's going to be something to respond to this internal state of threat. So until that person looks at their financial life and says, you know, at the end of every month, I feel threatened. I feel somehow uneasy. Okay, so that's fine. You then sort of address that and you say, what do you do for any kind of anxiety? You talk about it with friends, you think about it, you make social connections, and then you come up with some sort of a plan. And you just say, I'm not going to feel threatened because I'm just going to do this plan. It may or may not work, but it's the best I can do. It's the best I can come up with. It's some plan. And that's what we would do in any threat situation. You come up with a plan, and once you've had a plan, you then don't ruminate on it. You just think that's my plan and that's what I'm going to do, and leave it.
Yeah.
And that would be the best thing to do. But it's got to start with identifying the emotion. It's got to start with saying the reason that I feel I need to go on holiday is that I feel otherwise my life is grim because I'm coming to the end of my paycheck at the end of every month. So I got to do something to make me feel a bit better.
Interesting. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down there. Perhaps I'll ask you to come on again because as I say, I'm fascinated by this whole area. But the longer that I look at it, I wonder really the only thing we can do. We're such slaves to our emotions and our sort of subconscious, brain things firing. See, you're a neuroscientist. I call them brain things. The things sort of firing off that are sort of evolutionary processes from millennia ago, and we can't really do anything about. The more I sort of try to understand that and try to observe it in clients and people in my audience, the more I think really the only thing we can do to help ourselves is to put up frameworks, almost boundaries, and give ourselves paths to run on so that we don't have to think very often, and that perhaps we're even limited from reactions. Long-time listeners will know the classic it's Ulysses and the sirens. So he lashed himself, or he had his sailors lash him to the mast of his ship, had the sailors themselves stop up their ears. So Ulysses could listen to the beautiful song of the sirens, but the sailors wouldn't be tempted to dash the ship on the rocks. So he put in place a framework to get the best of all worlds. He could listen to the beautiful music, but knew that he wouldn't die as a result. And so he thought ahead of time and put that framework in place. The more I think about this is the more of these things we can put ourselves into, surely the most help we're going to be to ourselves. Am I right?
But there's another lesson to take from the story of Ulysses, and I think that's why doesn't Ulysses plug his ears? Why does it? And I think it's partly because he's very clear about what he values. He's very curious. He's curious about the world. He wants to know more. He's willing to expose himself to some risk, but not extreme risk. So it's this really interesting thing that he threads that needle. Like, I'm willing to hear the voice of the sirens and be tempted, but I'm putting in a system in place that if I give in to temptation, something will stop me. So the other option could have been the completely risk-free option of he could have plugged his ears as well.
Mm.
Okay, but he's decided what he values. And I think that's the key thing, that in our financial life, we need to decide what we value and then treat money as a technical issue. So money is a technical issue that you use to achieve what you value, but the brain is really, really good at value. It's just
Yeah.
really bad. It's really bad at numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you
Yeah.
know, and so I think if what you value is you value feeling happy, you value feeling content, you value feeling fulfilled, you value feeling the love of your friends and family, and you value a sense of freedom, the ability to move about the world unencumbered. So then you sort of think, how big do you want your mortgage to be if you value if you value those things?
Yeah. So if we then can identify the things that we really value, it clearly, am I right in saying then that there's a link between our sense of perhaps financial wellness if the mechanics of our money and the stuff that we really value are aligned?
Yes, exactly. And I think
Okay.
that particularly if we live our financial lives as a technical way of achieving what we value. So we don't really care what the details of that technical way are. We just do whatever we need to do financially to achieve what we value. Then I think we do well, because then I think we do things like, it's sensible to have an emergency fund, because what I value is not feeling threatened. I
Yeah, sure.
value the idea that I don't need to worry. So I might limit my expenses. I don't necessarily value a new car
Mm.
for the fact of having a new car. I mean, I'd rather have a sense of security and calm and have an old car that's safe. Okay, I value being safe. I value being able to get to where I need to go. So, but I think that at some level, if we really think about what we value and then think about, are the financial decisions we're making lining up with what we actually value in life?
Mm.
And then when they do align, then I think we feel content and happy. But I think what the Money Wellness Index kind of showed is that a lot of times they don't align that well.
Uh-huh.
So we are sort of making financial decisions that will never bring us what we value. Even at the level of people who are earning a lot of money,
Yeah.
six-figure salaries, they're not necessarily making financial decisions that are bringing them value in life.
Okay, so it's evident then, I think one of the quotations from the study was knowing more about financial matters would help me feel better about my money. So clearly we're starting to put together a bit of an equation here, is sort of understanding how our money works in order to help us align it with our values. Well, let's start with First Direct. Obviously, I know you're not a representative of First
Yeah.
Direct. You're a brain scientist that has come in to talk about this. But what are First Direct doing about improving people's financial capability?
Well, I think that the revolutionary idea is really, I think First Direct is talking about money as a wellness issue, meaning as an
Mm.
emotional issue. So on a practical level, they've created on their website what they call a money wellness hub, where they've
Okay.
gathered they've gathered the full reports for the Money Wellness Index. I've written a couple articles for them that are on there. But the idea is to start a conversation about our emotional life around money. And then on a practical level, First Direct's whole idea is that that you should be able to speak to your bank, and that being able to have that human contact is really important. So I think that anyway, as long as this emotional conversation starts, I think that's a really big step in a positive direction. There's a kind of funny thing about money that I mean, I suspect in your line of work, you have to do a lot of kind of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
People have so many issues about money that they don't really know, because we're never really told that we're supposed to talk about money in that
No.
way. What I often say is that you're able to tell people that you've had a stroke, right? There's some embarrassment about talking about
Mm.
physical health, but you can talk to people about diseases of the body. Increasingly, you're able to talk about some diseases of the mind. So, when I was a kid, nobody ever said they were depressed, or certainly nobody would have said they were on antidepressant medication.
No.
And now I find not a lot, but some people sometimes are able to say, I have some mental health things that are going on. So that conversation is starting to change. But I have still never met someone that will openly and honestly talk about their financial life
I
and say,
know.
you know what, I'm stressed about the mortgage. I mean, in our close family, we do talk about it a little bit, but even amongst brothers and sisters, I would
Mm.
say there's a level of privacy. There's a level of, well, we don't talk about that too much. It's somehow like, you can talk about going to the bathroom, but you can't talk about your bank balance. I mean, it's sort of strange what
Yeah.
we consider personal.
Yeah, you're right. I've long come to the awareness that the financial side of my job is actually relatively small. That's the easy bit, right? It's dealing
Yeah,
with
it is.
people and helping them to articulate their concerns and anxieties and hopes and aspirations. And then my job is essentially to help them navigate the financial system to carve the cleanest path from A to B, where they are now from where they want to be. So it's great fun. I think if my job was about money, I wouldn't do it because it would bore me out of my skull. But because it's about people, that's why I love it so much. And my desire to equip people is why I've sat, looking at this camera for the last 10 years, putting these
Yeah.
videos and podcasts and stuff out. And there is definitely an increase in understanding of financial wellness and well-being. Later on today, I'm going to a branch meeting of the Initiative for Financial Wellbeing. It's an industry thing trying to put more emphasis on financial well-being for our clients. And there's definitely more sense in this study by First Direct and the resources that they're putting together is definitely going to help. I'm a big fan of First Direct. This is not a sponsored video or anything, but
Yeah.
I've banked with First Direct since I've been married. So I think they're very good at this and very good at being able to speak to them as a bank. So I like that. Ash, how can people find out more about this study and check out the resources?
So if you just look up First Direct Money Wellness Hub, that's the central place on the First Direct website where they've gathered all of the information about the Money Wellness Index and a few blog posts of my own that I've authored for them.
Fantastic. I'll make sure there is a link to that in the show notes. But Dr. Ash Ranpura, thank you so much for your time, sir. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Pete. It was a real pleasure.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that, folks. A couple of key points to pull out. One that stuck out was that all our behaviors are driven by our emotional state. Really important. If we can be mindful of our emotions, we stand a much better chance of making better decisions. And also the crucial difference when it comes to well-being between money and value. Really, what we value is where we find happiness and well-being. Those things often are not finance related and can't be bought, at least not directly. Money might be able to give us more time with our family, say, if we build wealth so that we can scale back on work or whatever. But that's an indirect link. Very often the things that are most important are not money related. But my thanks again to Ash for his time and insight in coming on the show. Just to mention, for those of you who are interested in deep learning and taking positive action, particularly towards retirement planning, the next phase of Meaningful Academy is going to be an exciting development for you. So we're going to be opening the founders launch of Meaningful Academy Retirement Planning on the 6th of January, 2021. So this is going to be a short-term opening, a couple of weeks, maybe just over, which will allow some founder members into the academy. And those guys will help me shape the content in the coming months. In return for that, they'll get a deep discount, approaching 50% off what the finished price will be, something like that. This phase of the academy really is the culmination of the whole thing, and it helps you to make the transition into retirement and to manage that and to make the best of the longest holiday, right? So lots more detail to come. But if you want to be kept informed, join the mailing list. Go to meaningfulacademy.com, click through to the retirement planning phase and add your name and email address to the list. I'm so excited to get it going. And that's it from me for 2020. I'm giving myself a few weeks off to crack on with the academy content and to enjoy Christmas, of course. Don't know about you. I'll be glad to see the back of 2020 in many ways. I'm sure many of you will be too. But I wanted just to say again, a massive thank you to you, the audience, for all your support this year. As many of you know, I've had some health issues. Nothing major, I'm happy to say, but it's meant that I had to take some time out. The messages I received from you, so many of you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages, just wishing me well, offering me advice about how to manage energy levels and things like that. But more than anything, the love coming back from you has been incredibly humbling. Just reminding me what a great audience I'm very fortunate to have. So thank you. And I hope that you have a great Christmas and much, much better 2021. Just a reminder, there are over 5,000 like-minded people in the Meaningful Money Facebook group, meaningfulmoney.tv/community, but you're already in there, right? It's a great place. Of all the Facebook groups I'm in, it's my favorite. I might be a little bit biased, but you know what? It's a really nice community and a really lovely environment, right? People are kind to each other in there. So definitely check that out, meaningfulmoney.tv/community. But that's it, folks, for this session of the podcast. Hope it was helpful. Any questions or comments on anything Ash had to say, go to meaningfulmoney.tv/session402. Hope you enjoyed it, though, folks. Thank you for listening. Thank you again for your support this year, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.